God didn't bring you this far just to bring you this far. How many times we just go through my strength and my knowledge and my skills, like I'll make it happen. I cannot tell you how many years I spent living that way and carrying that burden and carrying that stress. There's going to be constant situations where you have an opportunity to take your cue from the world, or you have an opportunity to lean and take a cue from God, make your decision. But for me personally, I much rather take my cues from God, knowing what he can do from the other side with that. So if you're going through a tough season right now and you can't quite see the light at the end of the tunnel, just know that, God didn't bring you this far just to bring you this far, and he finishes everything that he starts. What if the voice in your head telling you that you're not good enough is actually a lie that you've been carrying around for years? For so long, I too felt not good enough, too broken, too inconsistent, and to be quite frank, too ordinary for God to truly use me for anything great. But scripture helped me rewrite that story. And within the next 10 minutes, I want to help you rewrite yours as well. I'm going to share with you a season of my life where I fell short of my potential by choosing to believe the lies versus believing the truth of what God says about me. And that season was the first time I took my stab at entrepreneurship. This was back in 2014, and I had reached my boiling point working for this large fitness company where I just felt like another number there. I didn't feel like I was living up to my potential. I didn't feel like I was being valued and appreciated. And one of the driving factors for me was I wanted to create a life where I could do life on my terms. I craved freedom. So I took my first stab at online entrepreneurship with my first fitness coaching company called Waistline Crusher. Like most people, I had no idea what I was doing. I literally quit my job and literally just started, paddling like hell to figure out how to create this online business. And, throughout that process, I can't tell you how many times I got mocked by coworkers that were from that gym that were going to tell me I was going to fail. From my own family members to, even my wife at the time was very, very skeptical of me being able to make this happen. So I literally had everyone and everything telling me that I was essentially going to fail and that online coaching was stupid at that time. Well, through my sheer will and truthfully stubbornness, I was able to actually run and maintain that business for about 2 years. It was a complete struggle the whole time, and a lot of it was me dealing with these identities and inner thoughts that kept coming up from the people I had around me in my life. And, after 2 years of going through that, I finally had to throw in the towel and admit defeat at the end of the day. And it was one of the hardest things that I've ever gone through because truthfully, I felt like a complete failure. The thoughts and the identities that people were putting on me, at that point in time were validated. I was like, they're right. I am a failure. I'm not going to be an entrepreneur. I don't know what I'm doing. It was a dumb idea. All these things I carried on with me, as I had to go back and essentially rejoin, the workforce. And over the next 5 years of me working for, several different companies throughout that time, I can't tell you how painful it was for me to, learn how to let go of that failure, and finally reach a point where, I was ready to make my next attempt at it. And looking in hindsight, I believe those 5 years were intentionally set up for me so that I could grow and develop and become the type of person that could be successful with an online business and develop the skill sets and the mindsets that were needed. And also to create that internal pressure for me to, when I step into it for the next time, have the mindset to actually see it through and be successful with it. And that was over 7 years ago as I went through that, and I've been successfully running my online business since then. So like looking back at that story, it seems like it's so long ago, but I'll never forget how hard it was for me to let go of that identity as I went through that season, and understanding that that's not truly who I am. That was just a season that I went through that, unfortunately, I had to have some failure occur so that I could get set up in the right direction and start to grow to become someone that was worthy and capable of achieving those goals that I had back then. So it makes me think about that common trap that I know I've fallen victim to more times than I care to admit. And I see this happen to a lot of people where they end up taking their cues from the world versus from God, right? And I share this because at that time, this is before I really built my relationship with God and truly got to understand him for myself. Was I was taking my cues from the world. So what other people were saying and doing was how I was shaping my identity and my value and who I am as a person. Versus if I had just understood the word of God back then, it could have saved me a lot of time and pain, and it possibly propelled me to my goal a lot faster. So, as I move forward in life, I really take that to mind of like, where am I taking my cues? Am I taking them from the market? Am I taking them from the economy? Am I taking them from the president? Am I taking them from my wife? Am I taking them from my clients? Am I taking them from my kid? Or am I really taking who I am and what I need to do and who I need to become from what God says about me in the Bible? So whenever I'm finding myself what I call the loop, right? Because you will naturally slip back. Like, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this. This is something you have to exercise every single day. Is, if you notice that you're sharing your dreams and your aspirations with someone and you don't get a positive response, right? They may not blatantly tell you can't do it, but maybe they're just really skeptical or, just not really interacting and kind of giving you what you're looking for. Now, the first thing to understand is, that's more so about them than anything that has to do with you, right? So when people respond that way, just keep in mind, like, that's their projection of seeing you, of what you're able to do and what you're going after. You're essentially holding up a mirror to them at the end of the day. That's kind of showing them like, well, maybe this is where they're kind of, falling short in, or, or just not willing to take those steps because you may be a little bit more ambitious than them. Or maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you made a really bad mistake, right? And it feels like it's the end of the world, and you'll never be able to make it up, and this is the end. Just remember, as you're going through and you're making those mistakes, like, sometimes those mistakes are meant to help you grow so that you can become a better version of yourself. But if you're holding on to that mistake and latching on to make it your identity, then you're going to miss out on the glory of God in the next step that he's going to have potentially lined up for you in your life. Just like my 5 year stint of going through that, I couldn't see it at the time, but looking back, that happened for me, not to me, so that I could become who I am today, which has been really cool to kind of look back and reflect on. So something else I'd like to share with you too is, as we replay the internal script, that's what becomes our truth. So like, what we say and what we think determines how we show up in the actions that we take. And I'll share with you a more recent story of, me kind of encountering this was, I had some massive hip issues, about a year ago, and I ended up going to a chiropractor, right? Like, I woke up one day and I was pretty much in a Z shape, and I felt this sharp pain in my lower back and I couldn't even move. This is the first time I'd ever experienced something like this, right? So I ended up figuring out that I need to go to a chiropractor and get things loosened up. And as I go in there and he's doing his assessment and working with me, this guy essentially told me that unless I hired him for his VIP, high ticket, like, back fixing program that is going to take a year for me to rehab. And at the time, I decided just to go with the traditional, like, hey man, just pop my backs and we'll do the copay. And, I've got a background in sports medicine, I'll do the rehab, whatever I need to do. So we end up going that route. And over the course of 6 months, I'm seeing them like once a week, and I'm starting to implement the things I need to do on my end. Once again, he's still telling me that, like, hey man, you're never going to be like where you used to be. Right. As I kept asking him, like, hey man, do you think I'll ever be back to this or be able to do that? And as I'm working with them, like, he kept putting these like limiting beliefs on me, like, hey Jonathan, you'll never be 100% like you used to be because of the joint issues and all these different things. And that lit a fire underneath of me. For me, if you want to inspire me, tell me I can't do something, and I will go use that as tackling fuel to go make that happen. So as I'm going through the process, and this is like the first time I'm like experiencing this for myself with the irony of me being a former fitness coach and personal trainer helping other people, now I'm experiencing it, so I have a whole nother level of empathy for those clients I used to work with now. Now that I went through it myself, now I reached a point where, like, I didn't know if I was going to be truly able to rehab it myself. There's times it felt like it was taking forever. I felt like no matter what I did, it just wasn't getting better. And I reached a point where I just gave it to God. And, as I prayed on it, outside of prayer, one of the things I would say every single day is, God, I want to thank you for restoring healing over me. I know you're healing my body now. And I said that especially on the days where I didn't feel like it, because those are the days that I needed it most, right? And as I continued speaking that every single day, giving it to God, and then once again, giving him the most amount to work with, like doing my exercises and stretching and all these different things that at the time I really didn't want to do. I had a breakthrough at right about December of last year where the hip pain just disappeared. And I've been rocking and rolling ever since. I'm back and lifting weight like I used to and haven't had any issues. And needless to say, through that process, I ended up firing that chiropractor for that very reason, because that was someone that was trying to give me his cues on what he believed for me versus what I knew deep down inside, that this isn't going to be me the rest of my life. And I'm going to go ahead and give it to the Father and give him the most amount of work with. And it was one of the, kind of cool proving points of going through and experiencing it myself, that allowed me to have a big breakthrough with that. So once again, sharing that with you, with there's going to be constant situations where you have an opportunity to take your cue from the world, or you have an opportunity to lean and take a cue from God, make your decision. But for me personally, I much rather take my cues from God, knowing what he could do from the other side with that. Right. So this kind of revealed some unique truths to me as I've had multiple experiences like this over my life is, your feelings aren't facts, but God's word is, right? So as I've grown deeper in my relationship with God, one of the things I've discovered is God's voice is very unique on how he comes to you. And one of the ways you can tell that it's God talking to you, right, or leading you in that direction, the Holy Spirit, however you want to look at it, is if it makes you anxious, if it makes you depressed, or if it makes you fearful, just know that that's not from God. Right now, I'm not necessarily saying it's the devil whispering in your ear. Maybe you just got some mindset things that you're working through. But I've known, what I've discovered though is anytime God's talking to you, there's going to be a sense of peace that comes with it, right? Because everywhere God goes, he brings peace with him moving forward. So as you're having thoughts, and let's say you're battling between, this negative belief versus, maybe wanting to replace it with a new belief, one of the things that helps me know how to accept or reject those beliefs is first identifying, like, is this God talking to me, or is this something else, or myself getting in my own head about things? And as you start to discern the difference between the two, then it comes down to which one do you want to feed, right? So I'll give you an example. I used to think I'd always have my hip issues, and I'd never be back in shape. And that's just who I am. Like, those were thoughts that I had, during that season. But, now then I switched that into, God can do all things, and I'm willing to come to the Father for. How many times in life do we just white knuckle it? How many times we just go through my strength and my knowledge and my skills, like, I'll make it happen. I cannot tell you how many years I spent living that way and carrying that burden and carrying that stress, versus when I finally got to a point where I was willing to bend the knee and fully submit and give it to the Father. That has been when I've experienced my biggest breakthroughs. And every time I've experienced one of those breakthroughs, peace has been associated with it, right? So maybe you're struggling with a different mindset of, I'll never change, right? Why not switch that belief and replace it with, I didn't come this far just to come this far, as God finishes all things that he starts. And that's been a really cool biblical principle that I've been able to learn through reading the Bible and just seeing all these different examples of every single thing that God starts, he always finishes. So if you're going through a tough season right now and you can't quite see the light at the end of the tunnel, just know that, God didn't bring you this far just to bring you this far, and he finishes everything that he starts, right? So in order to embrace the new belief, though, you have to address what's the fear, what's the negative belief, what's the limiting belief that for some reason I'm still holding on and latching on to. Maybe you're afraid to let go of a narrative that's been a part of you for years that makes you feel safe, right? And I know for the longest time when I went through that 5-year period of feeling like a loser from failing at entrepreneurship, it was way more comfortable to hold on to those beliefs versus to embrace the new belief of, no, I can be. I just need to understand these different skill sets and this different way of thinking and operating. But full transparency, unconsciously, I knew that was going to take work. That meant I was going to have to change my pattern. I was going to have to change the way I think. I'm going to have to change the way I operate, which takes effort. And you're stepping into something that you haven't experienced before or had success. So now there's the fear of failure, right? And also the fear of success. What if I do make it? Oh my God, now it's all on me. Now I have all this extra burdens, right? But in order for you to embrace those positive beliefs that can lead you to that next level in your life, what are those fear ones that are holding you back? And as you start to address the fear, well, then you can start to, make a conscious decision to let that go and go, I'm going to replace this for a different belief, right? So as I kind of get into like the core message for this, I think the biggest thing I've learned through, my mindset and, how that's evolved over the last, 10, 15, 20 years is you are not your past. You're not your worst moment. You are not your feelings. You are God's, that you are who God says you are. You're loved, chosen, equipped, redeemed. And as you start to fully embrace that and truly believe that about yourself, it's going to give you the opportunity to be able to build the life by design that you've always had deep inside your heart that you can't stop thinking about. And, I think of it like this. When you're holding on to limiting beliefs, basically old versions of yourself, it's like building a house on a cracked foundation, right? Obviously, that house is not going to stand the storm, and you're definitely not going to be able to build it, to a very high level. So until you remove the lies, you can't build the life that God designed, the cracks in the foundation. When you start to really let go of what all these other people have said about you, the world tells you how you should think and operate, and truly start embracing how God sees you and all of the promises that he has for you, which is over 7,400, by the way, throughout the Bible, you start to realize that you weren't born to be average. You were born to be a winner, right? You were born to, be fruitful, multiply, and take dominion. That was why you were designed. And when you start really leaning in and holding on to that, now you're able to tap into your God-given potential on why God sent you down here. So I want to leave with a couple of things to think about. You already have what you need to live in freedom. God has given you his spirit, his promises, and his presence. The lie says you'll never be enough. God says you are my workmanship, created for good works. And as I reflect on that, the three big things I want to leave you with is your value doesn't come from what you do, but from whose you are. You were sent here for a reason, and you won't be done until what you fulfilled that reason. So once again, whether you're 20 years old, 30, 40, 50, you're going to be here until you do the very thing that you were sent here to do. And you can do it the easy way by leaning into God and getting in rhythm with him, or you can do it the hard way. He's going to force you down that path one way or another, which for me, I find a lot of peace in that, knowing that I'm going to be here until I fulfilled my assignment, which is my number one goal in my life. Is I want to make sure I fulfill God's assignment. And last and most importantly, always, always remember, God finishes everything that he starts. So once again, if you're going through a dark season right now, you're going through a tunnel, you can't see the light, you can't see the hope, just know that God's going to see this through, and all you got to do is keep on moving, baby. So last thing I'd like to leave you with as you reflect on this, I hope you got value from the episode, is if you're struggling in this area, one of the things that I recommend you start doing is just start reading one chapter out of the Bible every single day. You can use the Holy Bible app. It's free. It's super easy. They even have narration from it. And just start getting into the word for yourself. And as you start reading through the Bible, you're going to start seeing the pattern emerge like I have, and start discovering these truths for yourself. And the other thing I would pair that with is, the power doesn't come from just thinking positive thoughts. It comes from speaking those positive thoughts, because the life you live is a direct reflection of the words that you speak. So figure out your power statement that helps fill you up and remind you whose yous are. And once again, I'll share with you with mine one more time is, whenever I'm feeling like I'm in one of those spots, I just remind myself, Jonathan, God didn't bring you this far just to bring you this far. So I challenge you, start reading the Bible and figure out your power statement, start speaking that over yourself every single day, and start changing your life and getting to the next level. So with that being said, once again, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Would love to hear your thoughts, comments, everything in the comment section down below. Make sure you send this episode to someone that needs to hear this message today. Once again, truly helps the channel, but most importantly, helps us expand the kingdom, which is the whole mission of this podcast. Once again, God bless. Hope you got value out today, and I'll see you in the next one.